Okay, good morning, everybody. Apologies for our late start this morning. One of our members called in sick at the last minute, so let's ask Councillor Meredith to step in at the last second. Right, before we start, if I could just ask for mobile phones to be turned on to silent or turned off. As far as I know, there's no planned fire drills today, but if the fire alarm does sound, if we could please exit through those doors over there. So we move on to agenda item 1, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? No. Okay. Agenda item 2, minutes for the meeting held on the 10th of October 2023. Are we all those in favour? Yeah. All happy? Yep. Brilliant. Okay. Agenda item 3, application made under section 17 of the Licensing Act 2003, Lapper Lane, 36 Highgate, Beverley. These proceedings are being recorded. In the event of an appeal to the Magistrates Court, a transcript will be provided for the court. Please bear in mind that whilst this is not a court of law, all parties will be given a fair hearing. All parties have a copy of the procedure which will be adhered to. Please would all parties state their name and why they are present for the purpose of the recording. I can confirm that members have read all documents provided by the parties. Right, okay, apologies. Right, so I'm Councillor Sean McMaster. I will be chairing this meeting. To my left, I've got John Wiley, Senior Committee Manager, Louise Wilson and Faye Glasscott from the Licensing Department. And to my right, I've got Councillor Meredith and Councillor B. Jeffries and Carolyn Ashton, who is our solicitor. Further documents will be accepted and will not be accepted, apologies, unless all parties agree.
Chair, do you want to get the parties to introduce themselves while
Yes,
they're here? We've got relevant persons and the applicant.
Yeah, so if I can ask the applicant to introduce himself, please.
Could you just press the microphone button?
Yeah, sorry.
Just click the better, that's all.
My name is Edward Scott and I am the applicant.
Okay, you can turn the microphone off now, thank you. Great. And relevant persons.
My name is Christine Robinson. Is that it?
My name is John Branton, and we are objecting to the licensing of Mr. Scott's proposal.
Otherwise, the camera sort of sits in the middle and we have the carpet to look back at later.
Brilliant stuff. Do the parties wish to call any witnesses?
No, I do not.
No, I do not.
Okay. Do the parties wish to ask questions of each other?
I do not.
Okay. So the time limits for the hearing are opening statements, which will be 3 minutes. Evidence from any witnesses, which there aren't any, well, that'll be 2 minutes. Questions of any other party or witnesses, which will be 3 minutes, and summing up is 2 minutes. These times are not set in stone. We do allow a little bit of leeway to give everybody a fair say. But if you could just try and avoid repeating yourself too much, that would be much appreciated. Are all parties content with the time limits? Although the subcommittee will allow a degree of, I've just said that. I'd now call on the Health, Safety and Licensing Manager, Louise Wilson, for any updates in relation to the application under consideration.
Chair, can I just clarify, and I may have missed this, so apologies, in relation to the documentation. Obviously, is there any further documentation to be handed in? If so, it can only do so with the agreement of all parties since the meeting has started. I don't know whether there's any additional documentation to be provided to the meeting this morning. Apologies if I've missed that. Thank you. Yeah.
Is that a no?
No further documentation.
Nothing from us,
Nothing. Okay, no, that's fine. Sorry, Louise.
Morning, Chair. It'll actually be my colleague Faye who does the presentation today for you. Thank you, Chair. We've received additional papers from John Branton and Christine Robinson. That was received on the 30th of January. And we also received photographs of internal layout of the premises received from the applicant on the 2nd of February. They're the only updates I've got. Thank you, Chair. You're happy for me to go straight into the outline of the report? Is that okay? This application was made under Section 17 of the Licensing Act 2003 by Edward Scott on behalf of Platt Job, I'm sorry if I've said that wrong, Restaurants Limited, in respect of 36 Highgate, Beverley. This application is shown in full at Appendix 1 of your report. The application seeks to permit the following activities: sale of alcohol, Monday to Sunday, 10 till 2300 hours, on the premises only. The applicant has stated that the premises is to operate as a bistro, which covers for 18 to 20 customers, with the sale of alcohol to complement the food served. The applicant has offered conditions of part of the application as shown at pages 5 to 6 of your report, and members may wish to consider if these are enforceable as written or whether these are statements, duplications of existing legislation. Further advice can be given should members require this. The licensing authority is satisfied that the application has been advertised in accordance with the Act by public notice on the premises, in the local newspaper and on the council's website. 4 relevant representations were received against the application. All representations were received from relevant persons residing in the locality of the premises. No representations were received from any responsible authority. When representations are received and not withdrawn, this matter must be determined by the Licensing Act 2003 subcommittee, who have the following options available to them as shown at section 5.1 of your report. These are to grant the premise licence as applied for, to grant the premise licence subject to the conditions mentioned in the operating schedule, modified to such an extent as the authority considers necessary for the promotion of the licensing objectives, to exclude from the scope of the premise licence any of the licensable activities to which the application relates, to refuse to specify the designated premise supervisor, to reject the application made. Thank you, Chair.
Do we need to adjourn?
Should we just, we need to pause. Obviously, a member of the committee have just left the room, so if we could just pause for a moment before we hear the application.
It's back.
When I get a call. More afraid of her than you guys.
Okay,
Sorry about that.
that's fine. Could you just turn your microphone off there, please, sir? Thank you. Right, okay. Right, so if I could call upon the applicant to give his opening statement and any witnesses. Okay, go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Edward Scott, and in 2022, I was crowned MasterChef UK champion. I went on to work under Gordon Ramsay in his flagship 3 Michelin star restaurant in Chelsea, as well as East Yorkshire's very own Pipe and Glass. In May this year, my first cookbook will be published. Let me tell you a bit about my restaurant. Lopaline Bistro will be a small operation of 18 to 20 covers, run by a small team of experienced staff members who will provide a high-end dining experience. The food is inspired by my love of regional French and Indian classical cuisine, and a very innovative fusion of these 2 wonderful cultures. A bistro of this kind is very exciting for the town of Beverley, and being able to sell alcohol will only enhance the experience of my guests. Although there have been no representations made by any responsible authority, there have been 4 representations made by residents, which I will talk about. The first representative, Christine Robinson, currently does not live close to the premises. They are concerned about staff leaving in the early hours. Can I assure Christine that the restaurant will be run by a very small team, and I can absolutely ensure that this will not be an issue. With regards to the Beverley Minster Quiet Garden, there have been no representations received by Beverley Minster Parish Centre, which abuts the premises. In respect of deliveries, the building has been used as a commercial premises for a great many years. In any event, there are parking areas which permit parking for up to 1 hour, which will be used for deliveries. The shared alleyway will not be used for deliveries. I understand that Benjamin Rose talks about parking, but as the committee will be aware, parking is not a matter for the licensing authority. There is, however, ample parking within close proximity of the restaurant, and due to the small size of this restaurant, I don't anticipate there being a large influx of cars to the area, Many of my guests will be residents and simply walk. There have been a few concerns raised over the shared alleyway and bin store. The restaurant has its own self-contained yard area. The yard is fenced off from other properties with a 6-foot iron fence secured by a locked gate. The yard area will be used for bins, and despite the bins being commercial, their size will not differ to those available to domestic properties. There will therefore be no issue with bins traversing the alleyway. Glass bottles will only be disposed of during sociable daylight hours to minimise public nuisance. There was a concern that planning permission had not been sought. I can confirm that this premises is a Class E commercial property and does not need planning permission for its intended change of use. May I add, there are hundreds of thousands of restaurants up and down this country which operate successfully in residential areas without issue, provided that they are professionally managed. I can assure the committee that this will be a very professional, well-managed operation, and the last thing I would want to do is cause issue to the residents, many of whom I hope will become our loyal customers.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, so are there any questions from the relevant persons regarding the applicant's statement?
I have a couple of questions, if that's okay. You mentioned that there was no planning application. I wonder about the planning application that you've made that I've not actually seen that for extractor fans. So that was a consideration.
You've turned your microphone off, sir, sorry.
My second question would relate back to the point that you made about the glass bottles being disposed of, which our concern is that, you know, we spoke about this briefly before, that the glass bottles would be transferred down the passageway that is directly underneath our bedroom. So of course, what do you refer to as sociable hours? What hours would they precisely mean? Sociable to me maybe is different, sociable to what that might mean to somebody else. And you say that many people will walk to the restaurant. And I do accept that point. I think many people in Beverley will find good use to walk to what I'm sure will be a very excellent establishment and a well-run establishment. But you have advertised this quite in a, you know, through the BBC on a national stage. So you'd expect people with somebody that has won MasterChef for people to travel a long way to come to your restaurant, as well as the local people that would, I'm sure, attend as well. So that'd be my 3 points about that people will walk. Yes, I'm sure that the majority of people will walk to your restaurant and there is parking nearby. But I think we do have to accept that there'll be people here from probably quite far and wide because of your reputation. And the planning permission for the extractor fan, what type of extractor fans would be put in? If there is planning permission already put in for that, I'm unclear about whether that is the case or not. And particularly the movement of bins through our joint shared pedestrian residential passageway. So those were the three questions that I would ask. Thank you. Is there anything?
Yeah, can I? Is it on? Yeah. You know, you're saying that staff won't be leaving in the early hours, but the licensing hours are till 11:30, and there's going to be clearing up time after that, isn't there? So we are reaching the early hours then, 7 days a week. So I'd just like to be assured of how you will deal with that.
Okay, Mr. Scott.
Okay, we might have to go recap the questions because I might forget. But the first one I think was in reference to smells from the kitchen and the extractor fan. Although not a requirement, the kitchen will be fitted with a suitable extraction system to minimise public nuisance from kitchen smells. I think this system is the most effective way of minimising such smells. And as I say, it's not a requirement, but I'm putting that in. I hope that demonstrates that I'm intending to operate a professional business and be respectful to the community. An application for planning has gone in for that system, and that details the size of the fan, but it's a small system. And as I say, this is the best way of minimising public nuisance. Question 2, sorry.
What about the noise of the fan? That's the thing I was a bit worried about, really, that it would be noisy.
The specification of the fan is in that planning application, but it's not a full-size commercial extractor unit, and the fan is located in the kitchen. So I don't think it will pose much noise to the outside environment, but that's a matter for the planning department. Question 2. What was question 2? Sorry.
Just quickly, the glass bottles, what do you consider to be the sociable hours for glass bottle and the movement of bins down the shed? You know, what was the traditional residential passageway? How many days a week? How often do you envisage emptying those bins? Are you going to put them out last thing at night at 12 o'clock? Are you putting them out during the day? Is that going to be 7 days a week? Those sorts of questions. And yeah,
So the glass bottles, that's I've addressed that in the operating schedule with the application. I've said that the bottles will be disposed of so as not to cause disruption to the residents. So to me, I can say that the glass bottles will only be disposed of during sociable daylight hours, so as not to cause any noise to the residents or any disruption. I think that's a good way of minimizing the noise from that. With regards to the bins, a minimum weekly bin collection frequency will facilitate the swift removal of garbage, and that will be, the bins will be located in my self-contained yard area, and they will be moved through the alleyway and put on the street for collection. As soon as they've been collected, they will be put back inside the gated yard, in the same way that residents will dispose of their bins, and that will be done. Again, it won't be done at last thing at night. It will be done at a time. If it's being collected early in the morning, it will be done at a sociable hour, so as not to cause disruption. I think that's the best way of working around that. So if they're going to be collected in the early hours of the morning, 7 o'clock, say, then they'll go out the evening before at a decent time.
thank you. The other question was relating to what you said, that the majority of people will walk and not park. Well, I think, the nature of the way that the restaurant has been marketed, I think you've marketed it beyond, far beyond the local environments. I would imagine it would attract a lot of people, hopefully in your case, from much further afield. Obviously you come to us with a reputation, and a history, of success. And I think that success, and people in Beverley do want that success, and we do want to share in that success with you, and we want you to be part of this, part of this town. I guess really all we're trying to do is, if your business is not a success, and if you do leave us, after a short amount of time, as regularly does appear to happen in Beverley, then what we are left with is something that is of a concern to us as not just residents in the street, but in terms of our kitchen area and our bedroom, they overlook the yard that you refer to at the back. And we worry that this may develop into something more than just a small select restaurant, that if it was unsuccessful for you, it would be easy for you to be able to move away, less easy for us to be able to move away. So I think we have to accept that there will be more than just local people coming, I think is a point that I would make, and I would hope that you would share with me, and that your hope for the restaurant would be that you would attract recognition from beyond just the East Riding.
Yeah, I may well attract people from further afield, but that's the same with any other restaurant. But there is ample parking in Beverley and within close walking distance of Lopeline Bistro, as well as numerous other on-street parking spaces which people can use outside of restrictions. There are a number of car parks. I could list them off. Lord Roberts Road car park is within 5 minutes. Wednesday Market within 2 minutes. Flemingate multi-storey car park within a 9-minute walk. Beverley Station car park 6 minutes. Butcher Row car park 5 minutes. And Spencer Street car park within 6 minutes. So there's plenty of parking. And if people do come to visit the restaurant, most people plan in advance and park somewhere suitable for their stay. And Beverley also benefits from having fantastic railway links to places like London, which the restaurant is very close to the railway station as well. So if people come from Hull or other surrounding towns, many people will come by train.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have any questions from members? Barbara?
Yes, thank you, Chair. My question is addressed to the applicant. What makes you want to open at 10 a.m.? Why so early?
The reason that I've put from 10 a.m. is in case I decide that I would like to open for a brunch. And in that case, I would be able to serve an alcoholic drink with that brunch. That's simply the answer.
Question relates to the length of the hours that you're going to be open. And of course, you're going to have staff arriving earlier than 10 and leaving later than 11:30 at night. How early and how late do you envisage the restaurant will be open and closed, functioning?
Sorry, could you reword that?
So your staff need to arrive before 10. How early do you think the staff will need to arrive to open up the restaurant?
They would need to arrive up to between 2 and 1 hour before the restaurant opens in the morning, and late at night they would leave 30 minutes to 1 hour after closing time.
So there will be movement and noise and preparation time, possibly from 8:30 in the morning until 12:30 midnight.
Yeah, yes, that's possible. But as I say, this restaurant will be a professionally managed operation, and I know that there are residents around and in close proximity. There is a flat above the restaurant, so I will bear in mind that any noise at those times should be kept to a minimum, and there's no reason why there should be any noise, because it's just going to be quiet clearing of tables, and all staff will be told to leave quietly and respect the local residents at early and late times where they may close up and clear up. Things like glass bottles will be left in a secure location and then disposed of in the morning, as I say, not to cause any noise. So noise will be kept to a minimum in this small restaurant.
And finally, just supposing you're unsuccessful with the licensing approval, how will that affect your decision making in terms of running the restaurant?
So this application is for the sale of alcohol, and it doesn't relate to the sale of food. And I have said before that I would like to serve alcohol to my guests to better experience, to give them a better experience for the customer. That's my primary goal. I want to serve the alcohol with meals, because it's a restaurant, and that's when I go and eat out, I expect there to be wine with dinner. But I can run the business if I had to until 2300 hours without a license, and still operate a food business from the premises.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, yeah, Richard.
Two questions, if I may, please, Chair. One for our legal advice and one for the applicant, please. If I could start with you, Ms. Ashton, please. Can I just have some clarity that should the licensing application be refused today, that would only affect the ability for the sale of alcohol on the premises, not the consumption of it, and that in theory there could be arrangements made where people brought their own?
Yes, I can advise that, and I'm sure those from the licensing authority will confirm that position, because obviously they enforce the licensing law on behalf of the licensing authority. But yes, the application today is simply for the sale and supply of alcohol. Consumption is not a licensable activity. So an example being if a premises were to allow patrons to bring their own alcohol, that wouldn't come under, that's not sale and supply. You would need a premises license for that. And I'm sure the licensing authority will be able to clarify that. So the restaurant, a restaurant could operate as a restaurant, and patrons could bring their own alcohol.
Thank you. I thought that would be the case, but I thought it wise to check. And then my question for the applicant, probably more of a planning matter than a licensing one, but I think it will come full circle and my logic will become clear. I've just quickly checked on the planning portal. The planning application for the extractor has not yet been validated. It's not yet been published, which might be why it's not been seen yet. I imagine the process is ongoing. My question, though, would be, have you had any pre-planning advice regarding the extractor? And have you been given any indication as to a likelihood of approval? Because my conundrum is, would the business viability be affected by the lack of an ability to get an extractor because of either potentially noise or conservation area impact? And if so, is there a plan B to make the business viable in the event that either you could get the extractor or that you couldn't get the extractor and wish to do something to minimise the impact? Because I'm, again, going to seek legal advice as well from a licensing point of view. Would there be any public protection issues there with potentially noise or smell generated?
I mean, I can come in relation to the viability. Obviously, viability of a premises is not a licensing consideration. Obviously, the risk is an applicant's risk. But obviously you've asked the question, but in terms of your considerations, the viability of a premises wouldn't be something that you would need to consider under the Licensing Act. It would be one of the 4 licensing objectives, and to keep your decision within those parameters.
You've been covered there, but could I just clarify then that there wouldn't be a public protection issue potentially which fell under licensing from any noise or smell?
In terms of public protection, obviously licensing and planning are 2 separate, interrelated issues, but 2 separate regimes. In terms of this application before you today, obviously responsible authorities, including environmental control, have been notified of the application and can make representations. They haven't in relation to this one, but obviously the planning issue is separate. So I wouldn't be able to comment on that. But in terms of today's application, they have been notified of today's application, and you've heard the licensing authority confirmed there have been no objections from any of the responsible authorities, which would include environmental control.
In which case then I rescind my question to the applicant, because clarity has been sought and given on exactly the width of our remit today. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Councillor Meredith. Are there any further questions from members? No. Okay, so if I could now move on to the relevant persons to give their opening statement, and then we'll follow that with some questions.
We're here today really to represent ourselves not as current residents, but as people in the process of buying the house next door, which should go through with led to believe in the next week. Our objections are about essentially the long hours that Mr. Scott has applied as opening times, and as we've heard already from Councillor Jeffries, that we would expect longer than those hours for noise to be there. We haven't had anything through in terms of the factors from the sheet that was sent to us about any mitigating factors, perhaps regarding noise abatement in the property. We're concerned as our property would, if we, and hopefully will be able to move in there, hopefully within a week's time, be adjacent to the kitchen area. And as we know, we've not seen any plans for the extractor fan, so it's hard for us to gauge whether that extractor fan is going to be something that's going to be noisy. Noise particularly is our essential concern when it comes to your business. We know that there will be staff movement around what is currently a secured passageway, which is locked and has always been kept locked. And we worry about the security as a neighbour. And we, of course, worry about the noise coming from the movement of bins down the alleyway, down the passageway, and the obstructions that they might cause as they come out. We do presume that there'll be increased footfall coming down the street because we do believe that, you know, you've got a very strong business plan, and we do believe that you've got history of being a successful in the food industry. But today we're here to talk about the licensing rather than the food, essentially. We're here to think about how that may impact on the quality of our residential amenity. And with such long licensing hours in comparison, let's compare to the Monk's Walk opposite, we're looking at an increase of maybe 100% in terms of the licensing application to what currently exists on the street. So that would be a change in the amount of time that, you know, people, young people, old people can have access to alcohol down Highgate. And therefore we do object on that particular grounds, that it brings an additional concern to us as residents of people drinking for a lot longer amount of time. And of course, the disposal of bottles down the passageway, which I don't know if I can refer to the photographs that we submitted. I don't know whether we've all got access to the photographs that are here. You can see in the photograph on the bottom left-hand corner, you can see where our kitchen and our bedrooms would be at the back of the house in relation to where the commercial kitchen space and the storage, as you say, rightly so, is the place where bins would be kept. And you can see that our close proximity of our residential space is going to be changed from where it has always been, maybe going back 100 years, from a house that has housed as a shop. So I think in terms of the amenity, that has changed. And I understand how that has changed, you know, on a governmental level. But in terms of our residency, which Mr. Scott rightly points out, we haven't moved in yet, and he's quite right to say that as well. But we are obviously seriously in the process, and hopefully we'll be moving in within days rather than weeks. And the increased footfall, the refuse disposal, the access to the passageway, and the way that perhaps people would be asked to exit. If there was a fire, is it a fire exit that people would be using in the event if there was a fire coming down what was essentially a shared residential access in the past? So I think there's a kind of change of use there from what there might have been in the past. You had anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, can I just referring to the photograph on the bottom right, you can see that it is a fenced off area, but everything is visible there. So if the bins were not kept in a tidy situation, it would be totally visible from us going out into the alleyway. So I just wanted to, you know, we are really, really close, and the image on the top right hand side is just from the kitchen window looking straight in to the yard. So we are, you know, it's really anything that happens in the restaurant will be really, really visible to us, and we will be able to hear it. And also our bedroom is just above the yard, so we're just basically anything that goes on in that yard will be observable, and we'll be able to hear it from our house. Yeah.
Thank you. Is that it?
That's
Okay.
enough.
Right, so if I could call upon the applicant to ask any questions that he might have of the relevant persons.
Well, thank you. Well, we can talk about first of all, we can talk about the shared alleyway. That, as I've said, will be locked and secure. It won't be used for any other use other than for being able to remove the bins from my yard. With reference to the noise of this business, it's going to be a low key restaurant with not many guests, 18 to 20 covers. It's very small. It's going to be run as a high-end restaurant, a really nice atmosphere, and I don't think that's going to cause a lot of noise based on the small size of the restaurant. Also, as I've said, noise from bins will be kept to a minimum and planned so as not to cause disruption, and that's the same for the disposal of glass bottles. Yes, there is you do have a view of my yard, but the use of my commercial property has always been a commercial property, and I'm perfectly entitled to use that as a commercial premises under the national planning regulations. And as I say, there won't be bins will be emptied regularly. And as I say, I intend to run this as a well operated and professional operation, and not have any issues with bins overflowing or anything like that. The yard won't be used by staff members. I don't need to use it for staff members. It will just simply be used for the storage of bins. I hope that.
Is that okay? Yeah. I totally believe in what you're saying, Edward. I just kind of worried. I just want things to be in place and things to be noticed and noted, so that for all our futures, that this can be continue to be a positive experience.
Yeah, no, definitely. As I say, I don't want to cause. The last thing I want to do is cause any issue to the residents. And I've said things in the operating schedule about disposing of rubbish and bottles at sociable times. And in the operating schedule, those conditions are enforced and enforceable. And if they are not followed, I can have my license taken off me. In theory, there can be an investigation. And as residents, there is also a chance for a review process.
Could I just ask one quick question of Mr. Scott, Edward, sorry. When people drink and eat, they often quite like a cigarette. Is there any provision for people that would like to smoke in the restaurant or outside of the restaurant? I know in some parts of Beverley, I've seen the smoking boxes that are mounted on the wall outside the restaurant. Is that going to be something you'd like to put up outside the restaurant?
But smoking is something I've definitely thought about, but due to the small number of guests, 20 maximum, an extremely small number of guests may be smokers. What percentage of that 18 to 20 will smoke, and how many of those will go outside the restaurant and smoke? And I don't think it will be very many. It will be similar to people walking down the street with a cigarette in hand, for example. I just think it's such a small number of covers that the restaurant will be seating.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll go to questions from members. Councillor Jeffries.
I think I need to address this to our legal advisor. I'm wondering whether a condition could be proposed to assist the applicant and also the other guests we have. In terms of the alleyway, would it be possible to change the divider that is already there, which is open gatework, isn't it? Open ironwork, so that it becomes more private in terms of vision as well as noise and smell. There is a locked gate which is needed to remain, but I'm thinking of, is there a possibility of providing some alternative means to assist both parties in gaining something better than what is there, to make both parties feel more comfortable? My legal advisor to comment.
Obviously, the conditions that are offered in the operating schedule are there. You've seen the location of both of the premises, and the boundary to the premises is currently a wrought iron 6-foot fence. I wouldn't be able to comment on in relation to, are we looking at visual as a visual cosmetic or as an acoustic?
I'm looking at both and wondering whether we could apply it as a condition from the applicant to provide. So aesthetically again, but also in reduction of noise and smell for the benefit of both parties.
If it helps, I think some advice from the licensing authority. Obviously the 4 licensing objectives are the key area of concern for members today. So is the aesthetics of the rear of the premises, does it fit within the 4 licensing objectives? Does it fall within the remit of preventing a public nuisance or preventing crime and disorder? And that would be the question members have to ask before they would consider conditioning a license to deal with what is effectively, like I say, is it a view or the aesthetics of the external of the premises? You would have to be certain it was undermining one of the 4 licensing objectives to consider that further.
One of the things that I gather can be used in objecting or considerations of a license agreement is noise value, smell value, disruption.
Public nuisance
public
is one of the 4
nuisance.
licensing
And
objectives.
that is
Yes.
why I am proposing that this could be a serviceable condition that would reduce both of those situations.
Certainly, it may be worth getting some further legal advice in relation to the definition of public under the terms of the Licensing Act 2003, because public usually affects a remit of larger than one party. This, in the view of the licensing authority, will be a private matter between the 2 parties rather than a public nuisance when it's not accessible to the public.
Well, in terms of, I can give you my legal advice now, I can outline it later, but in terms of public nuisance, I'll draw your attention to page 10 of the director's report, which restates some of the statutory guidance. At paragraph 4.18, the 2003 Act enables licensing authorities, responsible authorities through representations to consider what constitutes a public nuisance and what is appropriate to prevent it in terms of conditions attached to specific premises license and club certificates. It's important when considering the promotion of licensing objectives, licensing authorities and responsible authorities focus on the effect of the licensing activities at the specific premises on persons living and working, including those carrying on businesses in the area around the premises, which may be disproportionate and unreasonable. The issues mainly concern noise nuisance, light pollution, noxious smells and litter. Now, public nuisance is given its statutory meaning in many pieces of legislation, but it's not narrowly defined in the 2003 Act and retains its broad common law meaning. It may include in appropriate circumstances the reduction of the living and working amenity and environment of other persons living and working in the area of the licensed premises. Public nuisance may also arise as a result of the adverse effects of artificial light, dust, odour and insects, or where its effect is prejudicial to health. Where applications have given rise to representations, again, you're given further guidance at 4.21. Any appropriate conditions should normally focus, and this is particularly in relation to noise, on the most sensitive periods. For example, the most sensitive period for people being disturbed by unreasonably loud music, for example, is at night and into the early morning when residents in adjacent properties may be attempting to go to sleep or are sleeping. That's why there's a need for a licence for the performance of music between 2300 and 8 a.m. In certain circumstances, conditions relating to noise emanating from the premises may also be appropriate to address any disturbance anticipating as customers enter and leave. In terms of, if you'd bear with me, in terms of imposing conditions, licence conditions, if I can give you some further advice, must be appropriate for the promotion of the licensing objectives. They must be precise and enforceable. They must be unambiguous and clear in what they intend to achieve. They shouldn't duplicate other statutory measures. They must be tailored to the individual type, location and characteristics of premises and the events concerned. And they should be proportionate, justifiable and capable of being met. For example, in the example it's given, beer glasses may be available in toughened glasses, but wine glasses may not. So in terms of that, they should be proportionate, justifiable and capable of being met. So your determination when considering public nuisance and the type, you've heard both parties talk about noise nuisance and other nuisance. In imposing a condition, it would need to be proportionate and justifiable and capable of being met. So in terms of proportionate and justifiable, would simply, your consideration would be, would a close-boarded fence be proportionate and justifiable, and would it achieve the end goal of what it's intended to achieve? In relation to that. So you've heard about glass bottles, you've heard the applicant, what he's got to say about how he would manage that. And it's whether a fence would address the applicant's concerns and reduce that. So you've got to consider the proportionality, justifiable, and whether it would, in effect, give rise to what it's intended to achieve in terms of actual noise reduction.
And smell. Well, I leave it open for discussion because our aim always is to try and find a way for both parties to feel happy with the outcome. It occurred to me when I was looking here, and you've got the open wrought, that if you could come up with a nicer dividing wall.
From my point of view, I think if, as long as the yard area, I've said that I'm not going to use the yard area other than for the reception of waste. And as long as that area is kept professionally managed and the bins in good order and good housekeeping occurs, I can't see there being a need. If that is enforceable, that the bins must be properly managed, then I would say that perhaps there wouldn't be a need for a further fence. That's my take on it. And from the smells point of view, I am intending on fitting a fan and extractor system, and they are the best ways of dealing with smells from kitchens.
If I could just build on my advice earlier, in terms of conditions, a determination of whether an action or a step is appropriate, which is what's being raised for the promotion of the licensing objectives, that does require an assessment of what action or step would be suitable to achieve that end. It doesn't require a licensing authority to decide that no lesser step would achieve the aim. The licensing authority should aim to consider the potential burden that the condition would impose on the premises licence holder, such as a financial burden due to restrictions on the licensable activities, as well as the potential benefit in terms of the promotion of the licensing objectives. So it is that balancing act. And it's imperative that you ensure that the factors which form the basis of your determination are limited to those considerations of the promotion of the licensing objectives and nothing outside those parameters.
Okay, councillor Meredith, you had some questions?
Thank you, Chair. Well, actually, a comment and a question, really. I'd suggest that I wouldn't actually be comfortable with any conditions being attached in the way Councillor Jeffries has just described. Whilst I do agree entirely with the ethos behind them, I would worry that we would be potentially predetermining public protection officers. Should there be an issue that would be in need of enforcement, then we would be directing them down a particular path, as opposed to allowing for any and all options to be considered. My other worry is that this is in a conservation area, and so dictating a condition that might prejudice a future planning application, because any change to the street scene or the aesthetic would need planning approval, that might again tie hands at a later date. So I think it's actually very prudent to have brought it up, but I think that we would perhaps be taking a step forward today, potentially offering reassurance, and then finding it was discovered to be 2 steps backward in future when a solution was trying to be implemented. So I'm very glad it's been brought up. I agree entirely with your ethos and your logic, but I don't think that this would be the best place, and I'm more than happy to be corrected. I'm actually very used to being corrected, but from any officer advice, legal advice, would that be a sound conclusion? So actually that was a question, not a point, sorry. Yeah. Anybody wants to jump in for my next question?
I would reiterate, obviously, you know, it's perfectly acceptable to canvass conditions at this stage without predetermination, and obviously the parties have heard each other's representations and the concerns of the relevant persons concerning noise, and the representations made by the applicant is into how those concerns would be met. Obviously, the issue has been raised, and the concerns are there, and I would reiterate, obviously, you need to look at whether an action or step is appropriate for the promotion of the licensing objectives, and whether that step would actually achieve that aim, as it were. So there is that consideration for members. So it would be a matter to consider, but you've heard the concerns of the relevant persons in terms of their issues and the applicant in how those would be managed. Obviously, you've raised the issue of the fence, but obviously that's not being taken up and suggested, and that's part of your consideration.
I think I'm comfortable that should there be an issue, any neighbours, any objectors would have the ability to work with their ward councillors to speak to public protection officers. That may then in turn require the submission of a planning application to address any amenity issues, and that at no point in that sentence or those sentences have I used the word licensing committee. So I wouldn't suggest it fell within the remit of what either we could or should be determining today. But I am also very glad to have heard them said, because whilst this is a very formal process, we are still dealing with people, with human beings who want to have good and cordial relations with neighbours, I would imagine. And so it's actually, if anything can come from today, it's good for people to get to know each other, to hear concerns, and I would hope to act in a civilised and professional manner and work well with each other. I should qualify that my neighbour is a cemetery and they never make any noise, and I never have any issues with them, but we can't always be so lucky. If I may then, Chairman, I do have a separate question, possibly for Mr. Wiley, I would imagine. So we've already heard that the building has a Class E usage, which means it can be turned from the current business use beds, I believe, a bed shop, to a restaurant without the need for planning approval. Would an application, should it be approved today, to allow for alcohol consumption on the premises, potentially prejudice any planning application in future, in the sense that it could be turned into a bar or a nightclub or a casino where alcohol was consumed on premises, and that would make that application more likely to be successful should we take what is effectively a first step today, or would they be treated completely in isolation and judged entirely on their own merits?
I'll take that one if I may, Chair. Licensing and planning are 2 distinct regimes, and therefore they do have their own considerations. Although they obviously do cross over at points, they've got to consider each other. As we understand it from our colleagues in planning, there is a full Class E use in place, which is commercial usage, and therefore that would allow the premises to operate as a restaurant. It would allow it to operate as many different things, but for these purposes, it would allow it for any food or drink which is consumed mostly on the premises, financial services, professional services, lots of other services, including leisure facilities, etc., all within that Class E use. However, by determining one licence application never predetermines another. Every case must be considered on its own merits. So therefore, if this licence was granted and in the future the remit of the business changed and therefore the licence needed to be either amended or applied for again, then that same application process that's happened before today's licence would happen again, meaning everybody would get that same opportunity to make representation against any further proposals, and then it would obviously have to be considered by elected members if representations were received. So there is no predetermination of anything in the future by considering today's application.
Thank you. And I think it's important to qualify that planning and licensing are effectively entirely opposite sides, but of the same coin. And what I didn't want to do was open a can of worms in our discussions today. So whilst I thought what you would say would be the case, I thought it was prudent to make sure that it was actually said out loud. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. If there are no further questions from members, I'll move it along. Okay, so if we move on to summing up, if I could first ask the relevant persons to give any sum up that they wish, and they'll have 2 minutes to do so.
Yes, to summarise, we don't have the full knowledge of the licensing committee. We don't have as full an understanding as what Mr. Scott has for running a restaurant. What we do know is that this is has been predominantly residential street since it was first constructed maybe over 100 years ago. We do worry. We do worry about noise. We do worry about smell. We do worry about the increased, when I say traffic, I don't mean cars essentially. We worry about people smoking. We worry about the long hours. We worry about the long hours far exceeding the opening hours of the Monk's Walk, which has been an established, licensed premises for many, many years, and the need to extend it to that extent that might affect our residential usage, particularly after midnight, which I suspect, in terms of the staff, when you say they'll leave after half an hour or an hour, that will go beyond midnight. And we talked a little bit, or Councillor Meredith talked about this being the first step. And I do think it is the first step. I do believe that whilst this process would need to take place again, I do say with respect to what you said about this process having to take place, once it's taken place once, it will be much easier for me to open a licensed premises on Highgate again once this license application has been processed, because it's been through already. And whilst it's fine to say that it will need to be, go through this process again, I do think it would be made a lot easier once there already has been a restaurant on the street. And our worry does come, and perhaps this is a question when he talked about what premises it could become in the future. Are we led to believe then, from what you said, that this could be a bar that maybe could potentially serve into the early hours of the morning, like some bars currently do in Beverley? Could this be something such as a late night drinking place if Mr. Scott's business wasn't to be as successful as what he hopes it to be? So that would be a question, and a final question to the licensing officers next to me. Could this be, my understanding it is not good enough, I think, in today to understand, could this be licensed beyond midnight for a bar in the future? Have you got anything you want to
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify for you, so the application before you today is made by Mr. Scott. When a premises licence is granted, it's granted within the remit of what they've applied for. So Mr. Scott has put conditions forward about how he intends to promote the licensing objectives with his business. One of those conditions listed under the Prevention of Crime and Disorder is that alcohol will only be served with food, and the restaurant will not operate solely as a bar. So unless somebody comes forward in the future to formally amend that licence, at which point this whole process has to happen again, because that would be a dramatic change to the premises and therefore would have to go through a full public consultation, then if the licence was granted as applied for today, that premises cannot operate solely as a bar. It would only be entitled to serve alcohol with food.
Yeah, I guess my point would that process be easier? Should I wish to, in the future, should I wish to open a bar in the premises next door to us, would my application be viewed more sensitively if it had already been
Every case,
licensed?
yeah, every case will
So-
always be determined on its own merits.
Hmm.
And obviously, if you are, you can't really compare apples and oranges. So if an application came forward for a vertical drinking bar compared to a small bistro restaurant, then it would be very different considerations that would have to be given by members on that particular day. So by having granted a license for a restaurant with conditions, for example, that tailor it to only being alcohol with food, would be a very different application if members today were considering a vertical drinking establishment without such limitations. So by granting one doesn't predetermine another.
Can I just add, I know of restaurants that just serve a baked potato with rum cocktails, what's your definition of a restaurant? Can I ask that?
The simple answer to that is there is no legal definition as such. Obviously, the condition offered to today's applicant is that the alcohol will only be sold with food. Obviously, the limitations to that food are dependent on the particular type of restaurant. But what it obviously is conditioning is that it does say the restaurant would not only solely operate as a bar, which means it's not going to operate as a vertical drinking establishment because it'd be conditioned to prevent that at this current time.
Councillor Meredith, you had a very quick point of,
It was really just a point of clarification. Today, as I mentioned earlier, Chair, the remit of this committee is to determine if it is okay to serve alcohol with food, as has just been sort of very precisely described there by, well, as precisely as an undefined thing in legislation can be. But it was really, again, that there is a human element to this. I mean, I'm very jaded. I started off as a councillor with hair, for example. I've been on planning and licensing committees now for the better part of a decade. And I do realise that if I want my car fixed, I'll go to a mechanic. I can't do it myself. We can't expect people, either applicants or objector, to be experts in planning legislation, in licensing policy, whatever it may be. And the purpose for my question was to have that conversation, to make sure the information was known and to make sure that people understood what was actually being asked for and what was not able to be taken away from this without the entire process starting again. And I would suggest that if you were to apply for an application to have a bar there, that you would probably struggle in a house that's actually allocated for residential use as opposed to business and commercial. And so that wouldn't be comparing apples with oranges, that would be comparing apples with filing cabinets. And so I would, from my 8-9 years on planning and 800 or 900 applications I've seen in that time, be completely separate and in no way influential or prejudicial. And again, it wasn't really so much to help the deliberations here, but it was to help the people here in this room. And I thought it was worth spending 5 minutes just going through that for everybody's benefit. So really, sorry, Mr. Chairman, sorry, Mr. Wiley, that was just a point of clarification as to the motivation behind my thinking.
Thank you. Can I just clarify? I wasn't saying for 1 minute that I intend to open a bar in my house. What I was saying that in the future, opening a bar in the premises that the applicant has.
You feared that there would be an increased likelihood of approval should this be the case. And it was my cognizance of that concern that meant I asked the question I did. And why Ms. Wilson then turned around and said, actually, I think your exact words were every application is judged on a case-by-case basis and that one cannot prejudice another. And it was just, again, to really give you that peace of mind that what's happening today won't affect anything that happened 10 years ago, 10 days from now, or 100 years from now. It's entirely sits in isolation. And I just wanted to have that heard, especially since it's all on a record and being recorded. So I hope that at least gives you some peace of mind.
okay, yeah, thank you, Councillor Meredith. We've got nothing further from the relevant persons. If I can move on to the applicant to give a short sum up.
In summary, this is an application for the sale of alcohol. It does not relate to the sale of food, which I am entitled to do so without a licence until 2300 hours. I, however, would like to sell alcohol to better the experience of my customers. The question is, therefore, whether the sale of alcohol at these premises will detrimentally affect the licensing objectives. I respectfully submit that it will not, and I am supported in this by the responsible authorities. There have been no representations from the police, who must therefore be satisfied that the grant of this licence would not be contrary to the prevention of crime and disorder. No representations have been received from any child safeguarding board, suggesting that the application would not jeopardise the protection of children from harm objective. No representations have been made by public safety or health, and very importantly, there have been no representations made by any environmental health officer, who must be satisfied that this application will not undermine the prevention of public nuisance objective. Thus, all the authorities who have the expertise in dealing with the application are satisfied that the grant of this application will not undermine or hinder the licensing objectives. The concerns that have been raised by the residents are in some parts speculative, and I would respectfully submit that it is far too early to impose restrictions on this licence. I would very much like the chance not only to provide Beverley with an innovative dining experience, but to prove that I am capable of operating a professional operation. In the unlikely event that I am proven wrong, and should issues with the management of this bistro become apparent, the residents could engage the review process. But in any event, may I repeat that there are thousands of restaurants up and down the country who successfully operate venues in close proximity to residents. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If we move on to policy advice from Health and Safety and Licence Manager, if you have anything to add.
It's myself taking this again, Chair. Thank you. As mentioned, we can confirm to members that checks have been undertaken with the planning authority, who have confirmed that the Class C commercial use of the premises covers a restaurant. Therefore, should members choose to grant or refuse the application today, the premises can still trade as a restaurant, as they could operate as a bring your own alcohol, which would mean there'd be limited control to the place. Also, planning permission has been, there's no limitations in relation to the premises. This is also being checked with the planning authority. Parking is a primary concern under the planning regime. However, members can consider this as public nuisance. The planning permission for the fan is a matter for the planning authority to determine. Mention has been made of a condition regarding the disposable of glass. We can confirm currently such condition can be found in section D. This can be considered by members should they wish to consider. Would you like me to go over the conditions that have been proposed, Chair, that are remaining in that have been proposed? Reminder to members, should they be minded to grant the application, then they consider the revised conditions offered up by the licensing authority. You will see a number of deletions due to duplications of statement, which are unenforceable, or duplications of existing legislation. So if we go start off with box B, which is the prevention of crime and disorder. Alcohol only to be sold with food. The restaurant will operate solely as a bar. Staff to be well trained and vigilant in spotting any suspicious, disruptive or unlawful behaviour, which will be reported to the police if required. Box C, public safety. Adequate first aid provisions will be made with equipment available and an appointed first aider on site. A list of taxi numbers to be kept for the use of customers on request. Box D, the prevention of public nuisance. Customers to be requested to leave promptly after closing time. Disposal of empty bottles to be done so in a manner which is respectful to the community. Box E, the protection of children from harm. No entertainment of a sexual nature to take place on the premises. A Challenge 25 age verification policy in place. All staff to be trained effectively in how to verify an acceptable proof of ID. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Meredith.
Thank you, Chair. Just while we're on the subject of conditions, I was saving this one, although I must admit I was motivated, inspired, I think is the word, by Councillor Jeffries earlier when discussing conditions. Just two questions about viability of a potential rewording or strengthening, shall we say. It says that alcohol only to be sold with food. Now, in line with the recent comments earlier, would it be possible to add the phrase there, alcohol only to be sold to seated patrons ordering food? Which in turn would mean that there would only be so much space. You would have to be sat at a table in a dining experience, unless it wouldn't actually impact in any way, shape or form the application today, but may strengthen the requirement should the situation change and enforcement be needed later. I'm just thinking you can stand up and get a hot dog or a packet of crisps at a bar, and simply adding, removing the word with and adding to seated patrons ordering. Is that viable? Is that enforceable? Is that overzealous?
To amend it to say that alcohol would only be sold to seated patrons with food would be an enforceable condition. It is something that members could consider if you felt that was appropriate for the to meet the licensing objectives.
We will obviously have to have our deliberations before a decision's made, so I won't ask everyone to jump in now so they can think about it. But I thought it sensible to ask you if it was viable, otherwise we'd have been wasting our time discussing it later. And then my second question, on the back there it says customers will requested to leave promptly after closing time and disposal of empty bottles to be done in a manner which is respectful. Could that perhaps instead be changed to waste? I'm just thinking that a wheelie bin being rolled over a paved path might be as noisy, if not noisier, than dropping bottles in said wheelie bin, and that would lead me to believe that you can protect from one incident but not another. And again, it was just trying to make sure the condition was all encompassing to protect from what I could guess might be considered as a statutory noise nuisance in regard to waste.
You could expand that if you if the committee were minded to include further amounts of waste other than bottles, certainly.
My question on the back of that is there an element of pragmatism attached, as was mentioned by the applicant earlier? If the bins are being collected at 7 and the premises doesn't open till 10, they wouldn't be able to get the bins out. So there would need to be a balance. And again, as I said earlier, human considerations. But while we have to discuss this, I don't know yet whether people will be minded to vote for approval or refusal. But what I didn't want to do is have everybody come back in after we'd made discussions and then ask about changes. So I thought it sensible to ask now.
As it's currently worded, councillor, obviously there is some discretion there as to the times and days, etc., as to when it's disposed of. It says in respectful to the community. Obviously, if that was pinned down to particular times of the day, then obviously that takes the element of discretion out of that.
And that is quite subjective as well in terms of respectful is an indefinable term. It's just courtesy. And of course, you don't know, for example, you may hire a professional business waste removal company. They may go bankrupt. They may change their schedule. So there'll be things that are beyond the applicant's control. So should this be approved, I do not think it would be fair to condition set times because the future's unwritten and we can't predict that. But what I didn't want to do was give carte blanche either, and it was trying to ensure that this condition is as strongly worded as possible while still being balanced and fair.
Yes, any conditions proposed would need to be able to be met by the licence holder, and therefore they'd have to be able to legally comply with those conditions. It has to be reasonable within their control.
Thank you. I think that from a conditions point of view, now again, I have one vote and I still don't know which way I'm going to go, to be honest with you. But should the members here be minded to approve this, I'm now happier with the conditions than I was. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. We can move on to legal advice. Legal advisor.
I think before I give my legal advice, just so there's two. Obviously, the matter is not predetermined. We're talking about the proposed conditions with amendments. And obviously, the applicant would need to comply with those, including any proposed amendments. Just to clarify, would the applicant have any issue with some of those amendments which have been floated by members, such as alcohol only to be sold to seated patrons with food?
They're very much in line with what I'm aiming to do in the business anyway, so it wouldn't be a concern of me at all.
And just moving on to my legal advice, obviously, much as I've outlined in terms of what public nuisance means, and it's not narrowly defined, and that I'd reiterate the information you've been provided in your director's reports. I would remind you that you're best placed to determine what actions are appropriate for the promotion of the licensing objectives. And your determination should be on a case-by-case basis. And obviously much has been mentioned by all parties in relation to that. You should take into account any representations or objections that have been received from responsible authorities, in this case, that haven't, or other persons, and the representations made by both the applicants and obviously the relevant persons or the premises user, as the case may be. Your determination should be evidence-based, justified as being appropriate for the promotion of the licensing objectives and proportionate to what it's intended to achieve. But it is imperative that you ensure that the factors which form the basis of your determination are limited to consideration of the promotion of the objectives and nothing outside of those parameters.
Okay, thank
Could
you.
I ask a question? Is that?
No, I'm afraid not. So we've moved on from the question portion of the hearing, I'm afraid. Okay, so next we'll move on to our private deliberations, where we can consider everything we've discussed today. So if I might ask the applicant, relevant persons and the licensing officers to step out for a few moments whilst we do that.
Chairman, before everyone departs, what sort of timescale do you think, just so if the members of the public wanted to go and get a coffee or something, just to give me an idea on when to come back? Right, okay, so about 10-15 minutes, if you could wait, and then I'll come and collect you again, so you can come and hear the outcome of the appeal. Thank you.